Welcome back to Gathering Folds. Let's adjust the mic a little bit. Okay, there we go. So today we're folding a pattern named Rupture because it starts as this pretty standard closed hexagon, closed triangle weave, and then we have all of these open hexagon and open triangle twists that are jumping into the mix. And all of those open hexagon and triangle twists are really overlapping here on the side where you actually fold the twists. So the grid for today is a 48 division diagonal grid. That means 48 divisions from one side of the paper to the other, counted through the center. So the first fold in half brings a point to the opposite point of the hexagon, and you go from there. You do need a division of 3, but it's 48 divisions along the center line. And that is going to fit all of these twists. It's going to look slightly different on the edges. We're going to be a little closer on this edge and further away on this side because of the diagonal grid. This is slightly different fraction from diagonal, specifically rotated grid, but for tutorial purposes, it's a diagonal grid. So let's go ahead and get started. One of the main focuses today is the layering needed for all of these overlapping twists and how you go about that in the process of making it, and how I like to choose to layer my twists so that everything is symmetric in the end. And in this case, we are starting on the diagonal grid with a closed hexagon twist. I just folded in half in one direction and folded to find another line through the center. So that gives us the point at the middle of the paper. And I can go ahead and zoom in some more as we start to fold. So this is a closed hexagon twist. So all of our mountain folds are coming straight out from that center point. And I'm doing this as a right-handed twist. So the valley folds are above the mountain on the right-hand side. And I'm going around, and especially with a large grid, like 48 divisions, I'm leaving these plates that I've already folded down on the table. So the table is helping me to hold those plates in place. I'm not trying to have a bunch of plates up in the air, trying to get those in place. And usually if you hold your paper up in the air when you're putting in your first hexagon, your first 3 plates come undone by the time you get the 5th and the 6th. So zooming in some more, I've got that central hexagon twist, and I can tap the center and grab it, give it a sharp twist, a quick sharp twist to rotate all the way around. We're looking for these mountain folds going straight all the way until they hit the corner of the hexagon twist. And then from there, we're going to come 2 pleat spacing out from this hexagon. So valley 1 space out from the folded mountain, and mountain 1 space out from the valley. This is going to bring the mountain fold in contact with this existing folded mountain when we put the plate in, and that gives us the tube for the tube plate. And send the third pleat out to the edge. So making a three-way intersection of mountain folds and putting the valley fold on the side that allows this to be rotationally the same around the center point for each of the pleats, which is determined by the pleat from the hexagon. And press to squash. And I should mention that this is kind of an intermediate level tutorial. So if all you know is closed and open hexagon and triangle twists, you should be able to follow this. But the high density does mean that your grid needs to be pretty absolutely precise. So if you're still having trouble with the precision of your grid, maybe stick with simpler patterns. But if your grid precision is pretty good, then working at high density is the next step. So continuing onwards, I'm going to work around in a counterclockwise direction for this ring around the center at least. And I'll start with my next triangle twist. I've got the two pleat spacing again because I'm doing 6 of the same thing around this hexagon, although not necessarily directly doing 6 triangles and then moving on. And the mountain fold. And here I'm causing a pleat overlap. So I'm overlapping this pleat that we already put in from the triangle twist as I set up my new triangle twist and press to squash. And here's where the high density is going to come into play. We're going to put in an open hexagon twist on this pleat overlap. Now, because of the order that we folded these pleats, I've got the outline of my open hexagon sitting right in the corner of where these pleats overlap. I'm going to have my new mountain folds coming out in these directions. And my mountain folds there, my valley's one space away, and it's right under this folded mountain from the triangle twist that we just put in. This is why the grid has to be pretty super precise. And so I can bring up the rest of the pleats of this open hexagon twist. And you'll notice that this pleat is completely laying on top of the pleat from our previous triangle. And when that open hexagon is in place, we can press to squash. And there's a little bit of flexibility in how we move from here. So I did that order of the triangle twist to make an easy overlap to open for the open hexagon. From here, I actually want to go around in the other direction because I want to be adding 2 triangles and a hexagon. So triangles on the pleats coming from hexagons, hexagon on the pleat coming from a triangle. And this sequence is going to make it a little easier. So the first thing is I want to put in my triangle twist up here. There's, as always with origami tessellations, there's multiple ways to like multiple orders to get the twists in place. I could go straight to the hexagon and have the triangles as three-way intersections laying down flat, but for this particular example, I'm going to do the open triangle twist first. And that open triangle is also going to be heavily overlapping. So this is the pleat that's shared between the open triangle up here and the next open hexagon down here. So we see that valley right under the folded mountain of our triangle twist, just like we saw over here, where we've now rotated around the center. And I'm going to choose to start with the open triangle and have pleat overlaps down here and squash that open triangle twist. So far, everything with the layers, we've just been adding in twists on top, on top, on top. And then that feeds down into the next open hexagon, which I've chosen the overlap so that the open hexagon outline in the center made by the mountain folds is sitting right in the corner of that pleat overlap. And here I'm going to fold the hexagon. And one important detail is down here, we could have a pleat overlap between the pleat coming down this way and the pleat coming out of the central hexagon. But what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to open the pleat from the central hexagon and put in a three-way intersection. And I'm saying specifically a three-way intersection because while I could stand that up as a whole triangle twist, it's going to be simpler just to have it out of the way for now while I am folding the rest of this open hexagon twist. And with that open hexagon set up, I can go ahead and squash. And by the way, if you're trying to keep up with this in real time, that is going to be a big challenge. I do need to move fairly quickly in order for this to not become a 3-hour tutorial, since I'm using 48 grid divisions. So I do recommend watching first and then implementing on the second time through. So now that triangle twist that we had set up as a three-way intersection, I can go ahead and fold. And now we have a layering question. So I've been layering on top, on top, on top. And if I'm continuing to work around in this direction, which looking at this section, looking at this set of parallel pleats, when I put in new twists on this pleat, or a new triangle twist on this pleat, it's going to send a pleat this way. And as it goes, it's going to get further away. So here I have my bone folder along the line that the folded mountain here is on. And as I go down, I'm now one space away. So I'm going to want to continue folding in this direction, which means that I'm going to need to do something with the pleat from the triangle twist first. So that is going to come up on top. And this is also a nice choice for the symmetry of the pattern, because as you can see here in the finished version, all 3 pleats that go into the open triangle twist can be lifted on top at the same time, which is not the case for all the pleats of the open hexagon twist. Well, we can experiment and see if this pleat from this open hexagon twist is on top, then this pleat from this open hexagon twist has to be on the bottom. So we can't have all the pleats for the open hexagons on top because there's a contradiction between them, but we can have all the pleats going to the open triangle twists on top, and that works out in a very nice symmetric way. So continuing onwards, I'm going to repeat those last 3 twists again. I've got dense spacing. So when you start a set of parallel pleats, you need to know what your spacing is. After that, you're just following the pleat overlaps. And then open triangle on the pleat from the open hexagon. And then open hexagon. And the 3-way intersection, which conveniently, because we're going this way around, well, one of the things we can notice is with this open hexagon, there's 2 closed triangle twists that feed into it. One of them is tucked under the open hexagon and the other is out to the side. This one that we're trying to fold is out to the side. So even if I leave it fully set up, it does not interfere with squashing the open hexagon. And then I can immediately squash that closed triangle. And then lift the layer for the open triangle twist. And rotate and repeat. So dense spacing, open triangle on top. So I'm working my way down the set of parallel pleats, open triangle, then open hexagon, and then one way to verify that you've gotten the spacing right in the open triangle is that you should have tube pleat spacing between the closed triangle and the pleat from the closed hexagon. And by the way, I am keeping an eye on the chat, so feel free to say hi or ask any questions that you have. So I've got my twists squashed, and now I'm going to lift the pleat from the the open triangle. Now, one thing here that we want to pay attention to before we start this set of parallel pleats is that I have a pleat underneath here that I'm going to need to access first. So I'm going to lift this pleat from the closed triangle up above the open hexagon, even though eventually I'll want it down below for symmetry purposes, but for right now, for folding purposes, I want that on top so that when I fold through and make pleat overlaps, this pleat will be accessible to work with first. So I'm going to start with the open triangle twist, densely spaced. And then go into the open hexagon, just like we've been doing. And open the next pleat to place the closed triangle. And in this situation, folding that or setting up that closed triangle not only helps to prevent excessive overlaps, but it also prevents this pleat from running straight through existing twists. So this time, when we squash the open hexagon and the closed triangle, we're still not quite done. I'm going to go ahead and lift the pleat from the open triangle though. We do still have some pleat overlaps, and this time we get to see how we would set up that open triangle as a three-way intersection, and then we'll restore it to an open triangle in a moment. So I've got my open hexagon that needs to go in here. I can identify where it needs to go. This hexagon is sitting in the corner of the pleat overlaps. And I've got my directions for the mountain folds, basing it off of this existing mountain fold and kind of rotating that around the central hexagon. The central hexagonal space. And now we have our valley fold densely spaced right under this existing folded mountain. And I'm going to make a three-way intersection of mountain folds and lay it down flat as a placeholder for the open triangle. So this is not going to be a closed triangle. We're just letting the paper lay down flat temporarily. And now I'm able to open up. And the reason why this hexagon was so easy to identify is the pleat from the closed triangle was sitting on top already. And now I need to open further. And again, I'm going to put in a three-way intersection where I find those three mountain folds coming to a single point, evenly spaced. And I'm going to tuck that down flat, tucking it under that existing area, or under the pleat going into the hexagon twist. And get everything situated. And now you might notice if these layers are fighting each other, there is actually something you can do about that to give your hexagon a smoother surface to squash on. And that is untuck the layer and fold it back. So I'm folding back through this open hexagon twist, but it's on an existing grid line. It's not adding any new folds. And that will give us a smoother surface to squash the twist on. And in particular, if your grid is a little bit uneven and this flap is a little longer than this kind of pocket in this area under the twist inside the pleat, then I would definitely recommend pulling that out to let your squash twist more nicely. And then we can put it back on top because we want that layer to be on top of the closed triangle. The closed triangles always end up on the bottom. And then for both of these three-way intersections, then we can shift the mountain fold one space down, and I'll draw it on the next one, and put the valley right under the existing folded mountain, and get our open triangle twist. And so that's, I've got one mountain coming in here, the other mountain is coming in this direction, it's back under there, and now we want our third mountain to be on this grid line instead of this existing folded line up above, and our valley down below. So we can lift up and push our mountain one grid space over and flip it so the valley's on the opposite side. Okay. So now we have our first whole ring around the center, and always when I'm folding a pattern, I want to see at each stage what the backlighting is like. So I'll go ahead and show that. It's a very fun pattern for backlighting. And now for the next ring around the center. So in this first ring around the center, we did not see any repeats of the center. In this pattern, the open hexagon is a position of twofold rotational symmetry. So you see the same thing on opposite sides. Like we see this open triangle on opposite sides. You can see the pleats going into the open hexagon for these open triangles are parallel. They're hitting opposite corners. And so we will be seeing closed hexagons in that next ring around the center. We will also be seeing some open hexagons. In fact, we will be seeing half closed and half open. So next up, I want to take a set of parallel pleats. I'm going to grab this one, for example. They're all exactly the same. We have all of these pleats from the open triangles layered on top. There's another pleat down underneath. And now it's time to set up the next twist. So I want to set up the next twist, and I'm thinking about it as a hexagon and two triangles, because this is a hexagons and triangles six-fold tiling pattern. We see each hexagon is surrounded by 6 triangles. Each triangle is surrounded by 3 hexagons. And what I just told you about the symmetry, actually, I don't think I mentioned that the position of threefold rotational symmetry is in this open triangle twist. So we see open hexagons on all 3 pleats of this open triangle, and they're all at dense spacing. So we're going to have that dense spacing for our open triangle, or sorry, open hexagon around the open triangle. And in this situation, I could go ahead and set up the hexagon and have the 2 triangles on either side be 3-way intersections like we did for our 6th open hexagon around the center. Or I could say, well, that spacing for the hexagon gives me my spacing for the closed triangle twist up above. And I can go ahead and squash that closed triangle twist and then go and set up the open hexagon. And this time we have dense spacing between these 2 pleats. So I do need to tuck that triangle in and squash it later. And like I mentioned earlier, you can also bring that tucked layer out and fold it down. So folding through the open hexagon, but the open hexagon has a grid line there anyways. And that gives as smooth a surface as possible for that open hexagon twist. And here, I'm going to make sure that that closed triangle can stand up all the way and squash that as well. Now, how did I know that these would both be closed triangle twists? Well, you only see the open hexagon on opposite sides of the you only see the open triangle on opposite sides of the open hexagon. So the pleats right next to the open triangle have to be closed triangles as you go around the hexagon. So here we have our open triangle kind of buried, and each of the pleats that are covering it have twists on both sides of the pleat. So I can just tuck those under, and now that's in a symmetric state and I don't have to mess with it more later. Continuing onwards, I'm looking at a new set of parallel pleats, and I'm actually going to be folding a closed hexagon twist, identical to the center. And in this situation, I know that my closed triangles make tube pleats with the other closed triangles. So I'm going to have an extra space before I hit the valley fold. Now, how do I know this is another closed triangle? Well, it's open on this pleat, then closed, closed, open on the opposite side. So it has to be closed, and these closed triangles have to make a tube pleat. And this is our existing folded mountain. One space further out is the valley, another space for the new mountain fold. And for today, I'm going to stick with the sequence of fold the triangle on the first pleat of the set of parallel pleats, and then fold the hexagon and as you're setting up the hexagon, you will need to set up a triangle of some kind, whether that is a full triangle twist or a three-way intersection is up to you. In this case, since I do have the tube pleat spacing, it's arbitrary which one I do. But since this is a closed hexagon twist, I really need as much stability as I can get. So I'm going to lay that down as an intersection and twist that hexagon as far as it will go before coming back and squashing the closed triangle twist. Okay, from here, I know that around the closed hexagon, I need closed triangle twists. And they're going to be at tube pleat spacing. So I can set up my next triangle twist, and I'm going to find those 3 mountain folds in the closed triangle twist and lay them down as a 3-way intersection, because I now have 1, 2, 3 pleats feeding into this open hexagon twist. And I'm going to go ahead and fold that hexagon twist. Notice setting up that 3-way intersection for the new closed triangle. And I can even go ahead and pull that flap out of the pocket under the pleat going into the hexagon while I'm right there. And press to squash. And then both of these 3-way intersections are turning into closed triangle twists. And they're at dense spacing with the open hexagon, and you would expect them to both be the same because they're exactly on opposite sides of this hexagon twist. This one I'm going to leave layered on top, because when I come back around, I'm going to need that layer to be on top to fold the next twist. This one I'm going to tuck underneath and tuck this hexagon underneath the open triangle, because we already see both twists on that pleat, so it's not going to be used again. Rotating, I have the start of a new set of parallel pleats, and it's going to be exactly the same steps: closed triangle, closed hexagon, closed triangle, or rather this closed triangle, and then closed triangle, open hexagon, closed triangle. So we're starting with tube pleat spacing, putting in the closed triangle twist, and then opening up to put in the closed hexagon twist. And the 3-way intersection. And putting in the rest of the pleats for our closed hexagon twist. And grabbing that, rotating all the way around. And I am really emphasizing that because that's a common mistake that I see with the closed hexagons. They get rotated part way around, but not all the way. And squash the closed triangle. And continue. I know I'm going to need a closed triangle in here, tube plate spacing from the closed hexagon, but I'll wait to squash it until this open hexagon is in place. And I'm putting in the 3-way intersection for the next triangle down below and tucking that flap, or untucking the flap really. So I can squash my open hexagon and then squash these closed triangle twists. And it really doesn't matter if you go in and use your bone folder to smooth out the hexagon before or after these triangles are squashed. Everything's getting pressed either way. I'm leaving the pleat from this closed triangle on top because that's the first one that I'm going to run into as I'm coming around in the next ring around the center. And I'll go ahead and lift this open triangle to the topmost layer, just because it's a symmetric arrangement. I could also choose to have the open triangle be fully on the bottom layer, and that would also work. It's just a different choice. So it's not even impacting how the pattern looks on the other side at all. There might be very minor differences in backlighting if you don't have the pattern pressed very flat, but it's really not going to impact the final appearance on the other side of the paper. It's just the appearance on this side. So continuing onwards, we have a new set of parallel pleats, and we're going to do that same sequence again. I'm going to move a bit faster because we have seen it twice already. And we will be seeing it again in the next set of parallel pleats. So we've got our closed hexagon twist with 2 closed triangle twists. And we can definitively say at this point that all of the triangle twists that we will be folding in this ring around the center are going to be closed triangle twists. And then we have our open triangle with, open hexagon. Keep mixing up my hexagons and my triangles today. Open hexagon with those 2 closed triangles closely spaced around it. And then we're going to relayer a couple things. So like I mentioned earlier, having that open triangle twist on top is pure personal preference. Having the pleat layers symmetric is pure personal preference. You could just leave everything as it lays down, with the exception of the layering for the order that you work around. And it really wouldn't make a difference for the backlighting on the other side. So continuing, I have another set of the exact same parallel pleats, which I will work through in the same way. Closed hexagon with 2 closed triangle twists. And squash. One of the fun things about this pattern is that the edges of the closed triangles make this hexagon around the closed hexagon. And once we have the hexagon, closed hexagon to closed triangles, we are going to go into the open hexagon and two closed triangles. And yes, it may look like I'm folding this at ludicrous speed, but do remember I've been folding tessellations for 8 going on 9 years, and I've literally folded over 1,000 of them. So there's a lot of practice going into this. And now with the new set of parallel pleats, we have not only the pleats that we had before, but also 2 more. And we're going to start in exactly the same way that we've been doing with the closed hexagon with 2 closed triangles. And really, I can say in advance, we're going to do the exact same steps that we usually do, and then we're still going to have pleat overlaps, and we're going to resolve them with a closed hexagon and 2 closed triangles, because we did not have the initial pleats in our first set of parallel pleats in this ring around the center. And so we will need to fold those twists that we've been folding at the start of each set of parallel pleats again at the end of the last set of parallel pleats. And rotate. And squash. Okay, so continuing down in here, we're going to have that closed triangle that will be there at 2 pleat spacing, and we're going to lay it down flat temporarily. And then setting up our open hexagon, we have that closed triangle down below, and I'm going to untuck that tab. And press to squash. And squash the triangles as well. And also reorder these layers under the open triangle. And now, as I mentioned before, we have some more pleat overlaps that we haven't had in previous rings around the center. And that's going to be resolved with a closed hexagon twist. So I can open up and where these pleats from the closed triangle twists come together, I'm going to need a closed hexagon, and that's going to send pleats out. Where they hit other pleats, I'm going to set up 3-way intersections, closed triangle twists in waiting. Lay the other plates down flat, and rotate that closed hexagon down, and this triangle twist gets layered on top of the open hexagon, and that's a good thing because that's the layering I need for the next ring around the center. I need to remember to squash this closed triangle twist also, and that gets us through another ring around the center. I'll go ahead and show the backlighting. So the backlighting's pretty cool on this side. The pattern really shines on the other side. So we have one more ring around the center that we're going to do, and that'll fit on this 48 division diagonal grid. I should mention it would not fit on a 48 division standard grid. The diagonal grid is adding more grid lines that we get to use. And I'm going to arbitrarily pick a set of parallel pleats. I think this is the one that we just finished working on, and start folding there. So we're coming off of the closed hexagon twist. That means we have tube pleat spacing to get to our new triangle twist. And we can go ahead and fold that whole triangle twist and press to squash. And then at the overlap of those triangle twists, we're going to put in an open triangle twist. And I'm making a three-way intersection down below, but that is not going to be a closed triangle twist. That's actually going to be an open triangle twist. We never see three closed triangles in a row. It's 1, 2, and then open. So that's going to be a three-way intersection, and I'm tucking back the corner of the hexagon down below to make that area easier to work with. And here, this layer is sitting on top of this closed triangle twist. Once I squash my open hexagon, I'm going to lift the pleat from that closed triangle on top because I'm going to want to fold on that first before the pleat from the hexagon as I'm working my way around when I finish this set of parallel pleats, or finish the ring around the center more precisely. So from here, if I want to get to an open triangle at this three-way intersection, I'm going to restore the pleat from the open hexagon. I'm going to open up and shift this pleat that's going out to the edge through the pleat overlaps over one grid space, and press to squash. So we've got our open triangle on opposite sides of our open hexagon. And now we'll continue following the pleat overlaps. I know around my open triangle I need dense spacing and an open hexagon, and I'm going to have a closed triangle up above. And here the pleat down below, so the second triangle for this hexagon, is coming from a closed hexagon, so that has to have a closed triangle. And we could have even set up, actually both of these are outside of kind of the shadow of the open hexagon twist. So they're free to stand up immediately. And then now that we have both twists on either side of this pleat, we can tuck it under the open triangle twist. Continuing onwards, I'm going to have here on the opposite side of my open hexagon another open triangle twist. I can go ahead and squash that. I can also say this open hexagon had open, closed, closed. Next one needs to be open. And here I'm going to need an open hexagon twist because it's coming off of the open triangle twist. And down below will be a closed triangle. And press to squash. And once these are squashed, I'm going to untuck the open triangle twist and come on around. And now here on the opposite side of the open hexagon, so I went pleat to open, pleat to closed, needs to be pleat to open. So I know I'm going to have dense spacing, but I'm going to set it up as a three-way intersection because we already have pleat overlaps down here. So I'll just let it contribute to the next open hexagon twist. And then that's going to feed down into a three-way intersection. Notice these pleats are parallel. That's going to be an open triangle as well. I'm going to get it out of the way while I set up my open hexagon twist. And then I can get my open triangle squashed up above and open triangle down below. So lots of open triangles, this ring around the center, and entirely open hexagons. We're not seeing any closed hexagons on this ring around the center. Also, hi Adipine, glad you could join us in the chat. And so this is what we're going to end up with in the corner. So it won't be quite the perfect hexagon from the diagonal grid. We came a little too close to the edge to get that perfect edge, but there is a slightly different rotation that does get a very nice pleated border with 48 divisions. So that's the benefit of the perfectly rotated grid instead of the standard or diagonal. You can get a much more even setup. And then for this next set of parallel pleats, I'm coming off of an open triangle, so I have that dense spacing I'm setting up the three-way intersection up above and also down below of my open triangle twist, or sorry, open hexagon twist. And these will both be closed triangle twists. And then we start the next set of parallel pleats. And one of the things that you can do if you are wondering whether you set up your layers of pleats correctly, like maybe you have this triangle down under, you can check when you start the next set of parallel pleats whether, like, in the order that the twists are, is that the order that you encounter those pleats. Oh, dang. Nice. So, Adipi, you'll be happy to know that this is a pattern that will show up in the Advent of Test 2026 series. So you're saying you folded all 100 of the 2022 through 2025 patterns just in time for the new series to come out. So onwards and upwards, we've got a new set of parallel pleats. We're going to have a open triangle twist starting us off at the top. And I will say the series this year is going to be fantastic. Not quite as super challenging, tough to fold as last year, but it's going to have a lot of patterns with overlapping twists, a lot of patterns with flagstone areas. So that is going to be a lot of fun. And very visually appealing. So we've got our open hexagon twist, and I can go ahead and let that open triangle lay on top. And here, if I had more grid, if I had 64, 72, 80 divisions, I would also let that triangle be on top, because that would then be the first pleat that you encounter to get there. Yeah, Adipi, I'm glad you have lots of things to fold. There's never a lack of tessellations to fold, especially if you learn to fold from crease patterns, because there are, like, even though I have a whole bunch of video tutorials, there's even more things that are just crease patterns in Tessellation Garden that, yeah, there's frankly a ridiculous amount of patterns that I've folded and photographed and gotten ready for people to see as crease patterns too. It's like, if you thought the pace of video tutorials was ridiculous, check out the over 700 patterns in Tessellation Garden. Okay. And one thing I will say about folding from crease patterns is that these features of the pattern that I mention, of like, oh, around the closed hexagon twist, there are 6 closed triangles. And you see the same thing on opposite sides of the open hexagon. And the open triangle twists are only connected to open hexagon twists, and the sequence of triangles around the open hexagon is closed, closed, open, closed, closed, open. These are all things that I'm getting from the crease pattern. I actually don't have the crease pattern up in front of me because I have this finished version, and also a pattern with like a hexagon in six-fold symmetry, a triangle in asymmetric position, a hexagon in two-fold symmetry, and a triangle in three-fold symmetry. That is a structure that I've worked with enough that I have it very thoroughly memorized. But yeah, all kinds of fun stuff. And Oedipus is saying that quicksand looks cool with backlighting. That was one of those patterns from a live stream a while back. There's definitely tons and tons of cool patterns. And by doing the recent live streams, you'll actually be preparing for this year's Advent of Tess. So I'm already dropping in things you need to know for folding more repeats of this year's patterns. So at this point, kind of rambling a little as I fold, but we've seen all of these steps in a previous set of parallel pleats. So here I've got the open triangle, then open hexagon, open triangle on the far side that I'm going to set up as a three-way intersection and get that layer out of the way. I was folding just for myself. I might not move the layer out of the way, but there's a ton of options. There's several reasons why you might want to move that flap out of the way for at least the first couple times you're folding high density patterns. Nice. So Oedipus, you're saying that you've folded 113 tessellations and over 500 other origami models. Yeah, that's some dedication right there. So if I'm counting that right, that would be 100 patterns from Advent of Tess plus 13 from other sources. That's a lot of focus on my designs. I really appreciate that. And we're getting closer and getting closer. So always as I'm putting in new twists, I know in this ring around the center, it's always going to be an open hexagon. It's just a question of whether the triangle is closed or open. And so, let's see, this set of parallel pleats, I'll talk through a bit more. So we've got the open triangle with the open hexagon, and then we're finishing the sixth closed triangle around the closed hexagon. Well, thank you, Oedipus. They're saying in the chat that when they found me in 2023, they fell in love with tessellations. And yeah, yeah, it's amazing how these patterns are possible in the first place, and then that there are relatively straightforward folding sequences for a lot of them is incredible. And just the sheer variety. Like, even if you restrict yourself to basic twists, like even without the hybrid twists or the trapezoids, even with just squares, right triangles, equilateral triangles, hexagons, and rhombus twists, you can do so many different patterns. And then you throw in those other variables and it just explodes. So here we have an open hexagon with open triangles on both sides. So our first hexagon of this set of parallel pleats had an open hexagon on one side and closed, or sorry, had an open triangle on one side and closed triangle on the other. This one has open on both sides. Yeah. Yeah, what blows my mind about the possibilities of origami tessellations is that every time you fold a grid, you are holding unlimited potential, because there are infinitely many patterns you could fold with any grid. Any triangle grid, any square grid with diagonals, they all hold infinite potential. And then the third open hexagon in this set of parallel pleats has a closed triangle up above and another closed triangle down below, because you see it's on the pleat from the closed hexagon. And these guys are at tube pleat spacing with the open hexagon. And one of the things actually about the infinite possibilities just with this system is you can think of this pattern like as a whole of those four twists, the closed hexagon and triangle and the open hexagon and triangle. Or you can think of it as a whole bunch of open hexagons and triangles densely spaced, and then certain pockets get changed so that all those 6 triangles go closed and the hexagon goes closed as well. So you can put those pockets anywhere in the underlying alternating pattern that you like, as long as they're not overlapping. And that makes this pattern an infinite system of patterns just by itself. So there's even more infinity to go around, just with closed and open hexagon and triangle twists. So there's all kinds of infinite patterns, and actually, frankly, now you know why I have no trouble coming up with the alternate endings in the Advent of Tessellations ebooks. So there's a lot of variety anytime you're working with origami tessellations. And I'm on the last set of parallel pleats for this ring around the center. For most of this ring around the center, we've been working with 3 hexagons in a set of parallel pleats. For this last one, we'll have 4. And the first 3 we'll see are the same exact sequence that we've been having, with the first one having an open triangle above and closed below, the second having open and open, the third will have closed and closed at tube pleat spacing. Relative to itself, not to the neighboring hexagons necessarily. And then our final hexagon twist of the pattern as a whole. Of course, it's going to be an open hexagon because it's all open hexagons in this ring. And in this case, it is going to have open triangles on either side. Which is convenient because those layers can just sit on top. So we get, for the full pattern, these overlapping rings of open hexagons around closed hexagons. And on the back side, we have this cool weave pattern where those open holes are shared around these more standard looking weaves. Yeah, so Adipi in the chat is saying, like, even if he makes a particular pattern on 100 grid divisions hundreds of times, if you extend 10 grid divisions further, you can make all of them look different. Yeah, that's true. There's a ton of flexibility, and even under the constraints of like absolute symmetry, you must be able to repeat the pattern. There is absolute freedom of how to finish a pattern once you've started it. Yeah, there's a ridiculous number of possible patterns, even on something as small as 16 or 24 grid divisions. So the backlighting for Rupture, one of the things that really comes out in the backlighting is this kind of giant hexagon shape in the darker parts around these groups. And we really do see kind of a pinwheel star in the middle. and then the bubbles for Rupture. On this side, it's a little more obscured. You do see those open triangle holes really shine through, but you see more of the twists themselves, whereas this side is a bit more abstracted, which I think is really cool. So that's what's going on with Rupture, and I encourage all of you to fold this pattern for yourselves, and think about the layering, and would you choose to have all the pleats around the open triangles, so that the open triangle is on top, or would you choose them so that the open triangle is on the bottom? That is a choice that's up to you. Of course, the layering for the rings around the center is, I'm going to say, less optional because you will run into trouble if you layer differently and then you're trying to access something that's stuck under a pleat overlap. But the layering for the final symmetric look is very much something that you can choose for yourself. So happy folding, everybody, and I'll see you next week. It's not scheduled yet, but I'm planning on doing a giant pattern that will be one of the last patterns that I need to fold to include in the Advent of Tess 2026 ebook, which will be coming out in the next month and a half. So very exciting to have all of those patterns folded and get to share them soon with you guys. So happy folding, and see you later.